The day I came home from my final deployment in Afghanistan, I found my husband Marcus packing his designer luggage into his BMW. "I can't stay married to someone living on disability checks," he said without looking up. "My partners at the firm expect a certain image." What he didn't know was that in 72 hours, my grandfather's aerospace defense patents, worth $250 million, would finally transfer to me on my 30th birthday, changing everything forever. I stood there in our marble foyer, still wearing my desert fatigues, watching the man I'd married 4 years ago fold his silk ties with mechanical precision. The house felt alien after 18 months in the mountains of Kandahar, its pristine white walls and crystal chandeliers, a stark contrast to the concrete bunkers and dust storms I'd called home. But nothing felt more foreign than the cold stranger, methodically dismantling our life together. "Marcus," I whispered, my voice hoarse from the 14-hour flight from Ramstein Air Base. "I just got back. Can we talk about this?" He paused, a navy Armani suit draped over his arm, and finally met my eyes. Those same green eyes that had promised to wait for me, to build a future together, now held nothing but calculation and disdain. "There's nothing to discuss, Sarah. You're damaged goods now. The nightmares, the limp, that scar across your face. Do. You think I can bring you to client dinners? To the country club?" The scar. My hand instinctively moved to trace the thin white line that ran from my left temple to my jawbone, a souvenir from the IED that had ended my military career and killed 3 of my soldiers. Marcus had seen the photos the medics sent, had video called. Me in the hospital in Germany had sworn the injury didn't matter. Apparently, promises made to a woman lying in a hospital bed overseas were easier to break than I'd imagined. "The VA disability payments barely cover your medications," he continued, zipping his suitcase with finality. "I've worked too hard building my reputation at Goldman Sachs to be dragged down by a broken veteran." The words hit harder than any roadside bomb. Broken. As if my service, my sacrifice, the shrapnel still embedded in my left leg, reduced me to nothing more than a liability on his carefully curated balance sheet. I thought of my grandfather, Colonel William Hayes, who had built an empire from nothing after surviving D-Day, who had whispered stories of resilience and hidden strength into my ears as a child, who had made me promise to never let anyone diminish my worth. "I've already spoken to my attorney," Marcus said, hefting his bag toward the door. "The house is in my name, purchased before our marriage. You'll need to find somewhere else to live. I'd suggest somewhere more appropriate for your current circumstances." Before I could respond, our front door opened and in walked Victoria Ashworth, Marcus's law firm partner's wife, her blonde hair perfectly styled, her Chanel suit immaculate. She surveyed me with undisguised disgust, her gaze lingering on my combat boots and the visible scarring on my hands. "Darling," she said to Marcus, completely ignoring my presence, "the car is running. We have that dinner reservation at Le Bernardin at 8. The pieces clicked into place with devastating clarity. This wasn't a sudden decision born of my homecoming. This had been planned, orchestrated, timed for maximum humiliation. While I had been dodging Taliban bullets and watching over American supply convoys, Marcus had been planning his exit strategy with surgical precision. "You've been seeing her," I said, though it wasn't really a question. Marcus shrugged, not even bothering to deny it. "Victoria understands the demands of my career. She's suitable for the life I'm building." Suitable. The word echoed in the vast emptiness of what I had thought was our home. I had survived firefights, led rescue missions, earned a Bronze Star for valor, but I wasn't suitable for cocktail parties and charity galas. I wasn't suitable for the sanitized world of Manhattan elite, where war was something that happened to other people in places they couldn't pronounce. "The prenup protects my assets," Marcus added with the casual cruelty of someone discussing the weather. "But I'm not heartless. I've left $5,000 in the joint account. That should cover your immediate needs while you figure out your next steps." $5,000. The cost of one of his watches. A rounding error in his monthly entertainment budget. He was offering me less money than I'd earned in a single month as a lieutenant colonel, as if my military pension and disability payments were charity rather than earned benefits. Victoria checked her diamond-encrusted Cartier, clearly impatient, with this domestic unpleasantness interfering with her evening plans. "Marcus, we really should go. The Hendersons will be wondering where we are." The Hendersons. I knew them, had attended their 4th of July party last year in my dress blues, had listened to their hollow "thank you for your service" platitudes while they sipped champagne and complained about their tax brackets. Now they would welcome Victoria into their circle while I became nothing more than a cautionary tale about Marcus's brief lapse in judgment. "Where am I supposed to go?" I asked, hating how small my voice sounded, how the confidence that had carried me through special operations training seemed to evaporate in the face of personal betrayal. "There are plenty of veteran housing programs," Marcus replied, his tone suggesting he'd researched this thoroughly. "Transitional housing, halfway houses, places designed for people in your situation. My situation. Code for broken, dependent, disposable." I watched him walk toward the door, this man who had professed to love me, who had promised to honor our marriage vows, who had sworn that distance and danger couldn't touch what we had built together. Victoria linked her arm through his possessively, a gesture that spoke of ownership and victory. "I'll have my attorney contact you about signing the final papers," Marcus said from the doorway. "I trust you'll be reasonable about this. Fighting it will only cost you money you don't have." The door closed behind them with a soft click, leaving me alone in the suffocating silence of a house that had never really been mine. I stood there, for a long time, still holding my duffel bag, still wearing the uniform of a country I had served with honor, feeling more lost than I had ever felt in the mountains of Afghanistan. My reflection caught in the hallway mirror, hollow-eyed, scarred, wearing fatigues that suddenly felt like a costume rather than a symbol of pride. The woman looking back at me bore little resemblance to the confident officer who had left for deployment, who had believed that love could survive anything, who had trusted that the man she married would stand by her through whatever challenges life brought. But Marcus and Victoria didn't know what was coming. They had no idea about the locked safe deposit box downtown, about the legal documents that had been waiting patiently for my 30th birthday, about the legacy my grandfather had built in the shadows of his public military service. They saw only what they wanted to see, a damaged veteran with limited prospects and government benefits. In 72 hours, their calculations would prove catastrophically wrong. The house phone rang, jarring me from my shocked paralysis. I almost didn't answer, assuming it was Marcus calling to add one final insult to this devastating homecoming. But the caller ID showed a number I recognized. Grandpa's attorney, Robert Chen, calling from his downtown office. "Sarah." His voice was warm with concern. "I heard you were back. Are you settling in all right?" I almost laughed at the question. Settling in. As if coming home to find your marriage dissolved and your belongings destined for veteran housing constituted settling in. "It's been an eventful day, Mr. Chen. I'm sure it has. Listen, I know you're probably exhausted, but there are some time-sensitive matters we need to discuss regarding your grandfather's estate. Would you be able to come in tomorrow morning? There are documents that require your immediate attention." Documents. Legal papers. The machinery of inheritance that had been set in motion by Grandpa's death 6 months ago, while I was still overseas. I had been so focused on surviving my deployment and getting home to Marcus that I hadn't given much thought to whatever small inheritance Grandpa might have left behind. "Of course," I said, grateful for any distraction from the wreckage of my personal life. "What time works for you?" 9 a.m. would be perfect. "And Sarah? Bring proper identification. Birth certificate, military ID, passport if you have it. What we're discussing will require absolute verification of your identity." Something in his tone suggested this was more than a simple will reading, but I was too emotionally drained to analyze the implications. "I'll be there." After hanging up, I climbed the stairs to what had been our bedroom, each step sending spikes of pain through my injured leg. The room had been stripped of my belongings, my clothes gone, my military medals and commendations missing from their display case. Even my Purple Heart, earned with blood and sacrifice, had been removed as if it were evidence of some shameful secret rather than a symbol of service and valor. Only my old army footlocker remained, shoved into the back of the walk-in closet like an embarrassing reminder of an unfortunate phase. Inside, I found a single change of civilian clothes, my service records, and the framed photograph of Grandpa in his World War II uniform, the one treasure Marcus apparently hadn't deemed worth stealing. I sat on the edge of the bed we had shared, holding Grandpa's picture, remembering his stories about building something lasting from the ashes of war. About patience and timing and the importance of never revealing your full strength until the moment demanded it. About the patents he had developed for radar systems and communications equipment, innovations that had changed modern warfare but which he had always discussed in vague, modest terms. Everyone underestimated me too, little warrior, I could almost hear his voice saying, using the nickname he'd given me when I announced my intention to join the army. Let them. Underestimation is a tactical advantage. Outside, I heard Marcus's BMW pull out of the driveway for the last time, carrying him toward his new life with Victoria, toward dinners and social events where my absence would be explained, with carefully rehearsed euphemisms about moving in different directions and wanting different things. They would express appropriate sympathy for the poor, damaged veteran who just couldn't adapt to civilian life. Tomorrow, I would visit Mr. Chen and learn about whatever small inheritance Grandpa had left behind. Probably enough to rent a modest apartment, maybe buy a reliable used car, start rebuilding from nothing like so many veterans before me. It would be enough to survive with dignity, to prove that I didn't need Marcus's charity or society's pity. But tonight, on my first night back on American soil, I mourned not just the end of my marriage, but the death of the naive woman who had believed that love and loyalty were stronger than social status and financial calculation. That woman had died somewhere between the IED explosion that scarred my face and the moment Marcus zipped his final suitcase. What Marcus and Victoria couldn't know, what nobody knew except Mr. Chen and his locked filing cabinets, was that in 72 hours, everything would change. The patents Grandpa had developed during and after the war, the intellectual property he had quietly licensed to defense contractors for decades, the royalties that had been accumulating in trusts and investments for 30 years, all of it was about to become mine. $250 million. Enough to buy 100 houses like this one. Enough to make Marcus's Goldman Sachs salary look like pocket change. Enough to prove that sometimes the most dangerous people are the ones everyone underestimates. But first, I had to survive the next 72 hours. I woke up on the couch at dawn, my body aching from sleeping in full fatigues on furniture that had never been meant for rest. The silence in the house felt oppressive after months of constant noise. Helicopters, convoy engines, radio chatter, the controlled chaos of a forward operating base. Here, even the grandfather clock's ticking seemed muffled by expensive carpet and heavy drapes that Marcus had chosen to project success. Before my deployment, this house had represented everything I thought I wanted. The gleaming kitchen with its marble countertops, the master suite with its panoramic view of the Hudson River, the 3-car garage that housed Marcus's BMW, my practical Honda Civic, and the vintage Mustang we'd planned to restore together, someday. Now it felt like a museum dedicated to someone else's life, a life where a young Army officer had believed she could seamlessly transition between two worlds. I had met Marcus 5 years ago at a charity gala supporting wounded veterans, an event his law firm sponsored annually for the tax benefits and positive publicity. I was 25 then, a newly promoted captain fresh from my second tour in Iraq, attending in my dress blues because my commanding officer insisted that public relations were part of our duty. Marcus had approached me at the bar, seemingly fascinated by my stories of military life, charmed by what he called my authentic patriotism. "You're nothing like the women I usually meet," he had said, his smile warm and seemingly genuine. "You've actually done something meaningful with your life." Those words had meant everything to a young officer who spent her days surrounded by soldiers, but her evenings feeling isolated in a civilian world that seemed increasingly foreign. Marcus represented stability, success, a bridge between the military community that understood sacrifice and the civilian world that offered comfort and opportunity. Our courtship had been intense and romantic. He attended my promotion ceremony to major, beaming with pride as my grandfather pinned the oak leaves on my uniform. He learned military terminology, asked thoughtful questions about my experiences, even read books about military history to better understand my background. When he proposed, it was at the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier at Arlington National Cemetery, a gesture that had moved me to tears. "I want to honor what you've given this country," he had said, slipping the ring onto my finger. "And I want to give you the life you deserve after all you've sacrificed." The wedding had been small but elegant, held at the Army-Navy Club in Washington, D.C. My grandfather had walked me down the aisle, resplendent in his dress uniform despite being 82 years old. Marcus's parents, both federal judges, had welcomed me warmly, praising their son's choice of such an accomplished and principled woman. His colleagues from Goldman Sachs attended, their wives complimenting my poise and asking polite questions about military life. I should have noticed the subtle shifts that began almost immediately after the honeymoon. How Marcus gradually stopped asking about my work, how his interest in my stories faded into polite tolerance, how he began suggesting I consider transitioning to a civilian career, something less demanding that would allow me to support his ascending career trajectory. "You've already proven yourself," he would say when I mentioned potential assignments or advancement opportunities. "Isn't it time to focus on building our life together?" The pressure intensified when his firm offered him a partnership track, position that required extensive client entertainment and social networking. Suddenly, my military schedule became an obstacle rather than a source of pride. My deployments were inconveniences that complicated his dinner parties. My commitment to my soldiers was selfish dedication that took time away from our marriage. Victoria. "Ashworth understands how to be a true partner," Marcus had mentioned one evening after I declined to attend yet another firm social event due to training exercises. "She and Richard work as a team. She handles the social aspects while he focuses on building their wealth." I should have recognized the comparison as a warning sign, but I was too focused on preparing for what I knew would be my final deployment. The mission in Afghanistan was voluntary, a chance to lead a logistics unit supporting special operations forces in some of the most dangerous territory in the country. My commanding officer had tried to talk me out of it. "You've already done 3 combat tours, Major Hayes," Colonel Patricia Williams had said during our meeting. "You've earned the right to take a staff position, maybe teach at West Point. Why volunteer for the most dangerous assignment we have?" But I couldn't explain the restlessness I felt, the sense that civilian life was slowly suffocating the warrior my grandfather had helped forge. Marcus's increasing criticism of my career choices, his subtle but persistent pressure to conform to his vision of an ideal military wife, had left me feeling trapped between 2 incompatible identities. "Because it's where I'm needed most," I had answered. "And because I made a promise to myself and to my grandfather that I would never choose comfort over duty." The 18 months in Afghanistan had been brutal and transformative. Our forward operating base in Kandahar province was constantly under threat from Taliban forces who knew our supply routes and targeted our convoys with sophisticated IED attacks. As the senior logistics officer, I was responsible for ensuring that ammunition, medical supplies, and equipment reached isolated outposts scattered across the mountains. My soldiers called me Iron Major because I insisted on leading from the front, riding in the lead vehicle of every convoy despite regulations that technically allowed me to coordinate from base. I had learned from my grandfather that leadership meant sharing every risk you asked others to take, and I couldn't ask my soldiers to face dangers I wouldn't face myself. The attack that ended my military career had happened during what should have been a routine supply run to Forward Operating Base Chapman, a remote outpost near the Pakistani border. Intelligence reports suggested the route was clear, but Taliban fighters had learned to avoid our surveillance by using local children as spotters and timing their attacks to avoid our patrol schedules. The explosion had been perfectly placed, a shaped charge buried in a pothole that our lead vehicle, my vehicle, had traveled over dozens of times before. The blast flipped our armored Humvee, killing Staff Sergeant Maria Rodriguez instantly and critically injuring Corporal James Chen and Private First Class Michael Williams. I had awakened 3 days later in a field hospital in Germany. My face, rebuilt with titanium plates, my left leg held together with screws and wire. The hardest part hadn't been the physical injuries or the months of rehabilitation. It had been the phone call to Staff Sergeant Rodriguez's parents, the memorial service. I attended on crutches, the knowledge that my decision to lead from the front had cost lives. The Bronze Star they awarded me for continuing to coordinate the evacuation despite my injuries felt more like mockery than recognition. Marcus had visited me exactly once during my 3 months of treatment in Germany, a brief trip that he had scheduled around a client conference in London. He spent most of the visit on his phone, handling what he described as urgent business matters, barely looking at my bandaged face or the medical equipment surrounding my bed. "The doctors say you'll have significant scarring," he had mentioned casually, as if discussing the weather. "But plastic surgery can work wonders these days. My firm's insurance plan covers cosmetic procedures." Even then, focused on my own recovery and return to duty, I hadn't fully grasped what that comment revealed about his priorities. It wasn't until I was medically retired against my will, forced to accept that my military career was over, that I began to understand how fundamentally our relationship had changed. The final months of my deployment had been spent in administrative roles, processing my medical retirement and preparing for civilian life. Marcus's phone calls became less frequent, his emails shorter and more focused on practical matters like insurance coverage and housing arrangements. When I asked about his plans for my homecoming, he gave vague answers about being busy with a major case. "We'll figure everything out when you get back," he had said during our last video call. "Focus on your recovery. I'll handle things on this end." Now I understood exactly what he had been handling: the careful documentation of our separate assets, the consultation with divorce attorneys, the cultivation of his relationship with Victoria Ashworth. While I had been mourning the end of my military career and struggling to envision a civilian future, Marcus had been systematically preparing to erase me from his life. Standing in the kitchen where I had imagined cooking family dinners and hosting holiday gatherings, I felt the full weight of my isolation. The friends I had made through Marcus were really his friends, people who would naturally side with him in any divorce proceedings. My military friends were scattered across the country and around the world, focused on their own careers and families. My parents had died in a car accident when I was 12, leaving only my grandfather as family, and he had passed away 6 months ago while I was still deployed. The refrigerator was empty except for bottled water and expensive wine that Marcus had undoubtedly planned to take with him before I arrived early. The pantry contained nothing but organic spices and artisanal vinegars, the kind of decorative food items that looked impressive but provided no actual sustenance. Even the coffee machine required special pods that cost more per cup than most people spent on an entire meal. I found myself thinking about the mess hall at our forward operating base, the simple but substantial meals that fueled soldiers through dangerous days, the camaraderie of eating together, sharing stories and complaints and hopes for the future. the sense of belonging to something larger than yourself, of being valued for your contributions rather than your appearance or social connections. My grandfather had often talked about the importance of military brotherhood, the bonds forged by shared sacrifice and mutual dependence. "Civilians don't understand," he would say, his eyes distant with memories of battles fought in France and Germany. "They think military service is about patriotism and honor, and it is. But mostly it's about the person next to you, knowing they'll risk everything to bring you home." That sense of brotherhood was what I missed most about military life, more than the clear chain of command or the sense of purpose that came with serving something greater than yourself. In the Army, your worth was measured by your competence, your courage, your willingness to sacrifice for others. Race, gender, social background, none of it mattered when bullets were flying and people needed to be saved. Marcus's world operated on entirely different principles. Success was measured in billable hours and client acquisitions. Status came from the right school, the right connections, the right spouse who could enhance rather than complicate your professional image. Military service was respected in the South. Abstract, but viewed as impractical when it interfered with business networking and social climbing. I had tried to bridge those two worlds, to maintain my military identity while adapting to civilian expectations. I had attended law firm parties in cocktail dresses that hid my scars, smiled politely while attorneys complained about tax policies that funded the military, listened to Victoria Ashworth explain why supporting veterans was her favorite charity, because it was so authentically American. Now I realized how naive that effort had been. You couldn't serve two masters with fundamentally opposed value systems. Either you prioritized duty, honor, and service above personal comfort, or you prioritized wealth, status, and social advancement above all else. Marcus had made his choice clear by walking away the moment my service became inconvenient rather than impressive. The house phone rang again, startling me from my bitter reflections. This time, the caller ID showed my grandfather's old number, which confused me until I remembered that Mr. Chen had been handling the estate from Grandpa's home. "Office. Good morning, Sarah. I hope I'm not calling too early." "Not at all, Mr. Chen. I've been awake for hours." "Excellent. I wanted to confirm our meeting this morning and let you know that I'll have additional colleagues present. What we're discussing requires multiple witnesses and considerable documentation." Something in his formal tone suggested this was more than a simple will reading, but I was too emotionally drained to speculate about possibilities. Whatever inheritance Grandpa had left would be welcome, even if it was just enough to rent a small apartment and start rebuilding my life from scratch. "I'll be there at 9 sharp, I promised. "Perfect. And Sarah? I think your grandfather would be very proud of how you've served our country. What happened to you over there? What you've sacrificed? That kind of courage runs in your family." After hanging up, I showered and changed into the one civilian outfit I had found in my footlocker, a simple black dress that I had worn to my grandfather's funeral 6 months ago. Looking in the bathroom mirror, I traced the scar that ran across my face, remembering Marcus's suggestion about plastic surgery. The idea of altering my appearance to make others more comfortable suddenly seemed like the ultimate betrayal of everything my grandfather had taught me about authentic strength. At 8:30, I called a taxi to take me downtown, since Marcus had taken his BMW and my Honda Civic was nowhere to be found. Probably sold already, along with any other assets he could liquidate before I discovered their absence. The driver was a veteran himself, an older man who recognized something familiar in my bearing despite my civilian clothes. "You served," he said, more statement than question. 22nd Infantry Division, I replied. "Just got back from Afghanistan." "Welcome home, soldier. This ride's on me." As we drove through Manhattan traffic toward Mr. Chen's office, I reflected on the strange contrast between this stranger's genuine respect and my own husband's calculated betrayal. Sometimes honor and recognition came from the most unexpected sources, while the people you trusted most revealed themselves to be fundamentally hollow. In 2 hours, I would learn exactly what my grandfather had built in the shadows of his public military service. But whatever inheritance awaited me, the real gift he had given me was the knowledge that strength came from within, that worth couldn't be measured by others' limited vision, and that sometimes the most powerful victories came from being underestimated by people who confused appearance with reality. Marcus and Victoria had made their calculations based on incomplete information. Soon, they would discover exactly how wrong they had been. Mr. Chen's office occupied the corner suite of a prestigious building on Wall Street, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the East River. The waiting area was decorated with military memorabilia spanning decades of American warfare, photographs of soldiers from World War II through the recent conflicts in Iraq and Afghanistan, display cases containing medals and commendations, and a large portrait of my grandfather in his dress uniform that I had never seen before. Colonel Hayes was more than just a client, Mr. Chen explained as he led me into his private office. He was a mentor, a friend, and one of the most remarkable men I've ever known. What he accomplished both in service and afterward defied every expectation society had for a poor farm boy from Nebraska. The office itself was larger than most Manhattan apartments, with rich mahogany furniture and Persian rugs that spoke of old money and established success. But what caught my attention were the technical drawings covering one entire wall. Detailed schematics for radar systems, communication equipment, and guidance systems that looked far more sophisticated than anything I had seen during my military service. "Those are just a few of your grandfather's innovations," Mr. Chen said, noticing my fascination. He held over 200 patents in aerospace and defense technology, many of them still classified at the highest levels of government clearance. 200 patents. I had known Grandpa was intelligent, that he had worked in some capacity with defense contractors after the war, but he had always described his post-military career in modest terms. "Just helping design better equipment for the boys overseas," he would say when I asked about his work. "Please sit down," Mr. Chen gestured to a leather chair across from his massive desk. "Before we begin, I need to verify your identity thoroughly. This inheritance involves national security considerations that require absolute certainty about who receives access." I provided my military identification, birth certificate, and passport, while Mr. Chen photographed each document and made notations, in a thick file bearing my grandfather's name. Across from me sat two other attorneys I hadn't met, both wearing the serious expressions of people handling matters of extraordinary importance. "Sarah Elizabeth Hayes," Mr. Chen began formally, "daughter of Captain David Hayes and Dr. Elizabeth Morrison Hayes, granddaughter of Colonel William Morrison Hayes, you are here today to receive the inheritance your grandfather prepared for your 30th birthday, which occurs in exactly 68 hours. 68 hours. I had been so focused on the immediate crisis of my marriage and housing situation that I had almost forgotten about my approaching birthday. October 15th, a date that had seemed abstract and distant during my deployment, was now rushing toward me with implications I couldn't yet comprehend. "Your grandfather began planning this inheritance when you were born," Mr. Chen continued, opening a leather portfolio thick with documents. "He established a complex trust structure designed to protect and grow his assets while ensuring they would transfer to you at precisely the right moment in your life." He pulled out a photograph that made my breath catch, Grandpa holding me, as a newborn baby, both of us in what appeared to be a hospital room. But instead of the typical family photo, this image showed him whispering something in my infant ear, his expression intensely serious despite my obvious inability to understand. "He told me that day that he was making you a promise," Mr. Chen said softly. "A promise that you would never face the world without resources, that you would never be dependent on anyone else's charity or limited vision of your worth." The words hit me with unexpected force, bringing tears to my eyes as I remembered Marcus's casual dismissal of my military career and his assumption that I would be grateful for his financial crumbs. Somehow, even before I could walk or talk, My grandfather had foreseen the possibility that others might underestimate my value. Your grandfather's story begins with nothing, Mr. Chen continued, settling back in his chair. Born in 1922 on a failing farm in Nebraska, the youngest of 7 children. His father died when William was 12, leaving the family destitute, during the worst years of the Great Depression. By 14, he was working 16-hour days in wheat fields just to keep food on the table. I had heard fragments of this story over the years, but never in such detail. Grandpa had rarely talked about his childhood, preferring to focus on the future rather than dwelling on past hardships. He enlisted in the Army at 17, lying about his age because military service represented his only escape from poverty, Mr. Chen explained. But William Hayes wasn't content to be just another soldier. He studied every technical manual he could find, volunteered for the most dangerous assignments, and impressed his commanding officers with his innovative solutions to complex problems. Mr. Chen showed me military records I had never seen. Commendations for designing improved communication systems under fire, innovations in radar technology that had saved countless Allied aircraft, field modifications to existing equipment that had been adopted throughout the European theater. By D-Day, your grandfather was a technical specialist attached to the Army Signal Corps, Mr. Chen continued. He landed on Omaha Beach with the second wave, carrying prototypes of communication equipment he had designed to coordinate between ground forces and naval artillery. The image of my grandfather as a young soldier charging across the beaches of Normandy while carrying his own inventions struck me as quintessentially him, combining courage with intelligence, never content to simply follow orders when innovation might save lives. The war changed everything for him, Mr. Chen said, pulling out more documents. Not just because he survived when so many didn't, but because he realized that the real power lay not in fighting wars, but in developing the technology that determined who won them. After the war, Grandpa had used his GI benefits to study electrical engineering at MIT, graduating summa cum laude in 1949. But instead of joining an established defense contractor, he had started his own research company, working out of a garage in Cambridge while developing revolutionary improvements to radar and communication systems. The timing was perfect, Mr. Chen explained. The Cold War was beginning. The military needed technological advantages over the Soviet Union, and your grandfather had ideas that were decades ahead of their time. The Pentagon became his primary client, and everything he developed was immediately classified. The patents had started modestly. Improvements to existing radar systems, more efficient radio transmission technologies, guidance systems for early missiles. But as Grandpa's reputation grew within the defense establishment, he was given access to increasingly sophisticated projects and unlimited research budgets. By 1955, he held 47 patents in radar technology alone, Mr. Chen said, showing me a chart that tracked the exponential growth of Grandpa's intellectual property portfolio. By 1965, that number had grown to 138 patents across multiple defense applications. What made the patents so valuable was their fundamental nature. Rather than improving existing technologies, Grandpa had developed entirely new approaches to problems that every defense contractor in the world needed to solve. Companies couldn't build modern radar systems, communication networks, or guidance systems without licensing his innovations. The royalty payments started small, Mr. Chen continued, but they grew exponentially as his patents were incorporated into everything, from fighter jets to missile defense systems. By 1970, your grandfather was earning more from royalties than most Fortune 500 companies generated in total revenue. The numbers Mr. Chen showed me were staggering. Royalty payments that had started at thousands of dollars per year in the 1950s had grown to millions per year by the 1980s, then tens of millions per year as military technology became increasingly sophisticated and dependent on his foundational innovations. But your grandfather never lived like a wealthy man, Mr. Chen noted. He maintained the same modest lifestyle, the same small house, the same old truck. He reinvested every penny of royalty income into expanding his research and developing new patents. I remembered Grandpa's house, a simple two-bedroom ranch in a middle-class neighborhood, furnished with practical furniture that he had owned for decades. His only indulgences had been books and the workshop in his basement where he continued, tinkering with electronic devices well into his 80s. He was playing a much longer game, Mr. Chen explained, building wealth not for himself, but for future generations. Every patent he developed, every royalty contract he negotiated, was designed to generate income for decades after his death. The trust structure Grandpa had created was as ingenious as his technical innovations. Rather than simply leaving money in bank accounts or traditional investments, he had established a complex network of holding companies and licensing agreements that continued generating revenue from his patents long after his death. Currently, your grandfather's intellectual property generates approximately $4 million per month in royalty payments, Mr. Chen said, the figure so large that it seemed abstract. That income has been accumulating in various investment accounts for the 6 months since his death, growing at an average rate of 8% annually, $4 million per month, $48 million per year. The numbers were so far beyond my experience that I struggled to comprehend their reality. Marcus's partnership track salary at Goldman Sachs, which he considered impressive, was less than what Grandpa's patents generated in a single week. The total value of your inheritance, including accumulated royalties, investment growth, and the current market value of the patent portfolio, is $253,417,826 as of yesterday's closing bell, Mr. Chen announced with the gravity of someone delivering world-changing news. The silence in the room stretched for long moments as I tried to process what I had just heard. $250 million. More money than most people could earn in multiple lifetimes. More money than entire corporations were worth. More money than I had ever imagined existing outside of government budgets and international banking. There are conditions, Mr. Chen continued, carefully designed by your grandfather to ensure this inheritance serves its intended purpose. The conditions were surprisingly simple, but profoundly thoughtful. I couldn't access the full inheritance until my 30th birthday, ensuring I had sufficient life experience to handle such responsibility. I couldn't transfer or give away more than 10% of the principal in any single year, protecting the inheritance for future generations. And I had to maintain active involvement in overseeing the patent portfolio, ensuring Grandpa's innovations continued serving American military interests. Your grandfather believed that wealth without purpose was meaningless, Mr. Chen explained. He wanted to ensure that his life's work continued protecting American soldiers while providing you with the independence he never had as a young person. The irony wasn't lost on me. While Marcus had abandoned me because he thought I was broke and dependent, I was actually wealthier than anyone in his social circle. Wealthier than his law firm's most successful partners, wealthier than the corporate executives and hedge fund managers whose approval he so desperately sought. There's one more thing, Mr. Chen said, his tone becoming even more serious. Your grandfather left specific instructions about how you should handle this information. He was very concerned about people who might try to exploit your wealth or manipulate you because of it. He handed me a sealed envelope with my name written in Grandpa's distinctive handwriting. Inside was a letter that felt like receiving guidance from beyond the grave, advice from someone who had spent decades thinking about how to protect the people he loved from the corrupting influence of extreme wealth. My dearest Sarah, the letter began, "If you are reading this, then I am gone and you are about to inherit resources beyond most people's imagination. The temptation will be to share this news with everyone, to prove your worth to people who have underestimated you. Resist that temptation. True power lies not in displaying wealth, but in using it wisely while maintaining the values that made you worthy of it." The letter continued with specific advice about maintaining privacy, choosing advisors carefully, and never allowing wealth to become a substitute for character and accomplishment. but the final paragraph addressed my current situation with an accuracy that seemed almost supernatural. By now, you have probably discovered who truly values you as a person versus who only values what you can provide them. The people who abandoned you when they thought you were vulnerable will try to return when they discover your resources. Don't let them. You deserve relationships based on respect and genuine affection, not financial calculation. Somehow, even before I was born, my grandfather had anticipated that I might face exactly the kind of betrayal I was experiencing with Marcus. His inheritance wasn't just financial security, it was validation that my worth had never been dependent on anyone else's limited vision. "We'll need several more meetings to complete all the documentation," Mr. Chen said as our session concluded. "But in 68 hours, on your 30th birthday, you'll have full access to everything. Your grandfather would be proud of how you've served our country, and I think he'd be especially proud of how you're handling this transition." Walking out of the building into the crisp October air, I felt like I was moving through a dream. The city around me looked the same, but my relationship to it had fundamentally changed. The expensive restaurants where Marcus entertained clients, the luxury boutiques where Victoria shopped, the exclusive clubs where his colleagues networked, I could buy all of them without significantly impacting my net worth. But more important than the money was the knowledge that my grandfather had seen something in me worth protecting and nurturing. While others measured my value by my income or my usefulness to their ambitions, he had recognized qualities that transcended financial calculation. In 68 hours, when the inheritance became officially mine, I would face choices about how to use this unexpected power. But for now, I had to survive the remainder of my exile from the house that had never really been home, knowing that very soon, everything Marcus thought he knew about my situation would prove catastrophically wrong. The taxi dropped me off at a modest diner 6 blocks from Mr. Chen's office, the kind of place where construction workers grabbed coffee before dawn shifts and office clerks ate lunch over paperback novels. After spending 2 hours discussing figures that defied comprehension, I needed somewhere normal to process what had just happened. The inheritance felt surreal, like something that had happened to someone else, while my immediate reality remained uncomfortably concrete. I was homeless, estranged from my husband, and surviving on military disability payments. I ordered black coffee and sat in a corner booth, watching ordinary people navigate ordinary problems, while my mind struggled with extraordinary circumstances. The elderly man at the counter counting change for his breakfast reminded me of Grandpa in his final years, living simply despite wealth that could have purchased anything he desired. The young mother juggling a toddler while reviewing what appeared to be job applications brought back memories of my own financial anxiety before enlisting, when college seemed impossible and the future uncertain. Somewhere between my second and third cup of coffee, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Sarah, this is Jennifer Martinez from Channel 7 News. We'd like to interview you about your recent return from Afghanistan and your perspective on veteran services. Would you be available this afternoon?" The request struck me as oddly timed. I had been back in the country for less than 24 hours, and news organizations typically didn't track individual soldiers returning from deployment unless there was a specific story angle they were pursuing. My chest tightened as I realized the most likely explanation. Marcus or someone in his circle had contacted the media, probably spinning my situation as a human interest story about a struggling veteran in need of community support. I declined the interview politely, but saved the reporter's contact information. If Marcus was orchestrating a public relations campaign around my supposed destitution, I wanted to understand his strategy before deciding how to respond. The thought of becoming a poster child for veteran poverty while sitting on a $250 million inheritance struck me as darkly ironic. My phone rang immediately after I sent the declining text. Marcus's name appeared on the screen, and after a moment's hesitation, I answered. "Sarah, thank God." His voice carried a tone of manufactured concern that I now recognized as his professional persona. I've been worried sick about you since yesterday. You seemed so disoriented when I left. Disoriented? As if discovering your husband's betrayal and abandonment was a symptom of post-traumatic stress rather than a rational response to devastating circumstances. I'm fine, Marcus. What do you want? I want to make sure you're taking care of yourself. Victoria mentioned that there are excellent support groups for veterans dealing with adjustment issues. The VA has some wonderful programs. Victoria had mentioned. The casual reference to his new partner discussing my mental health needs with the clinical detachment of someone planning charity work struck me as particularly grotesque. I don't need support groups, I said, keeping my voice level. I need to understand why a reporter just contacted me about doing a story on veteran services. A pause that lasted several seconds too long. I may have mentioned your situation to some colleagues. People are genuinely concerned about veterans returning from combat zones. There's real interest in highlighting the challenges you're facing. The challenges I was facing. Code for the poverty and dependence he assumed defined my post-military life. Marcus was positioning himself as the concerned ex-husband trying to help his troubled veteran wife access appropriate resources, a narrative that would enhance his reputation while explaining away our divorce as an unfortunate but understandable consequence of my service-related difficulties. Don't contact any more reporters about me, I said firmly. My private life isn't material for your public relations strategy. Sarah, you're being paranoid. People want to help. The managing partner at my firm sits on the board of several veteran charities. There could be real opportunities here. Opportunities. Everything with Marcus eventually came down to opportunities, professional advancement, social connections, strategic advantages. Even my military service and current struggles were being evaluated for their potential utility in his career development. I said no, don't make me repeat myself. I ended the call before he could respond, but my hands were shaking with anger. The audacity of turning my personal crisis into networking material, of discussing my private struggles with colleagues and reporters as if my life was content for his professional portfolio, revealed a level of emotional manipulation that went beyond simple selfishness. The reporter called back 20 minutes later, her voice more insistent than before. Ms. Hayes, I understand you're dealing with some difficult transitions right now. We'd really like to give you a platform to share your story. There's growing awareness about the challenges female veterans face, and your experience could help other women in similar situations. The carefully crafted pitch suggested someone had provided her with specific talking points designed to appeal to my sense of service and desire to help fellow veterans. But the timing and approach felt orchestrated rather than organic, as if this interview was part of a broader strategy I hadn't yet fully understood. I appreciate your interest, I replied, but I'm not ready to discuss my personal situation publicly. If I change my mind, I'll contact you directly. After declining the interview again, I walked aimlessly through downtown Manhattan, trying to reconcile the competing realities swirling around me. In 64 hours, I would have access to resources that could purchase media companies, law firms, even the investment bank where Marcus worked. But today, I was dodging reporters interested in profiling my supposed destitution while sleeping on the couch in a house where I was no longer welcome. My wandering brought me to Battery Park, where tourists took photographs of the Statue of Liberty while office workers ate lunch on benches overlooking the harbor. I found an empty spot near the water and called the only person I trusted to give me honest advice. Colonel Patricia Williams, my former commanding officer who had become something approaching a friend during my medical retirement process. Sarah, I was just thinking about you. How's civilian life treating you? The simple question nearly brought me to tears. It's complicated, Colonel. More complicated than I ever imagined. Want to talk about it? I've got time. I gave her an abbreviated version of yesterday's homecoming, Marcus's departure, the emptied bank accounts, his assumption that I would be financially dependent on his charity. I omitted any mention of the inheritance, following my grandfather's advice about maintaining privacy until I fully understood the implications of my new circumstances. Jesus Christ, Colonel Williams said when I finished. I knew that husband of yours was ambitious, but I never figured him for the type to cut and run when things got difficult. You dodged a bullet finding out his true character now, rather than later. Her matter-of-fact assessment provided the clarity I needed. This wasn't about my inadequacy or the challenges of veteran transition. This was about Marcus revealing his fundamental character when tested by genuine adversity. The question is, what's your next move? She continued. You've got education, experience, and skills that translate well to civilian careers. Don't let one selfish bastard define your entire future. I'm working on that, I said. But there's something else. Marcus has been talking to reporters about my situation, positioning it as a story about struggling veterans. I think he's trying to control the narrative around our divorce. That's smart politics on his part, Colonel Williams admitted grimly. If he can frame your separation as being about your service-related challenges rather than his character, failures, it protects his reputation while making you look like the problem. The strategic analysis helped me understand Marcus's behavior in context. This wasn't just personal cruelty, it was calculated reputation management designed to minimize any professional consequences from abandoning his veteran wife. What would you do? I asked. I'd be very careful about any media engagement until you've got your own strategy figured out, she replied. And I'd document everything, financial records, communications, any evidence of his behavior. If this turns into a public dispute, you want facts on your side. After ending the call, I spent the afternoon walking through neighborhoods where I had never lived, but might soon be able to afford. The Upper East Side with its museum block mansions, the West Village with its tree-lined streets and boutique shops, even looking at real estate listings for penthouses that cost more than most people's lifetime earnings. The strange exercise of window shopping for homes worth tens of millions of dollars while technically homeless struck me as symbolic of my current unreality. I possessed theoretical wealth beyond most people's dreams, but couldn't access any of it for another 64 hours, leaving me suspended between desperate circumstances and extraordinary resources. By evening, I was exhausted from walking and emotionally drained from processing the day's revelations. I returned to the house that still technically belonged to Marcus, using the key I hadn't yet been asked to surrender. The emptiness felt different now, not the crushing isolation of abandonment, but the temporary inconvenience of transition. I found a bottle of wine that Marcus had overlooked in his hurried departure and poured myself a glass while reviewing the documents Mr. Chen had given me. Patent applications spanning 6 decades, royalty agreements with defense contractors whose names I recognized from my military service, investment statements showing steady growth in accounts I never knew existed. One document particularly caught my attention, a detailed analysis of how Grandpa's patents had contributed to military operations in Iraq and Afghanistan. The communication systems that had kept my units connected during combat operations, the radar technologies that had guided supply helicopters through hostile territory, the targeting systems that had enabled precision strikes against enemy positions, all of them incorporated innovations my grandfather had developed decades earlier. Reading those technical specifications while sitting alone in Marcus's abandoned house, I felt a profound connection to my grandfather's legacy that went beyond financial inheritance. His work had literally helped keep me alive during my deployments, had protected thousands of soldiers whose names he never knew, had given American forces technological advantages that translated directly into saved lives. The money was extraordinary, but the knowledge that my grandfather's genius had contributed to my survival and the safety of my soldiers felt infinitely more valuable. This inheritance wasn't just wealth. It was continuation of a family tradition of service that transcended individual gain. My phone buzzed with another unknown number, this time a text rather than a call. Ms. Hayes, this is Robert Kane from the New York Post. We're working on a story about veteran support services and would love to include your perspective. Very sympathetic angle focused on successful reintegration. Please call when convenient. The repeated media interest confirmed my suspicion that Marcus was actively promoting my story, probably providing reporters with my contact information along with carefully crafted background details designed to generate sympathy while protecting his own reputation. The successful reintegration angle suggested he was positioning any coverage as ultimately positive, allowing him to claim credit for supporting veteran causes while distancing himself from personal responsibility. I deleted the message without responding and made a mental note to change my phone number as soon as possible. Whatever public relations strategy Marcus was implementing, I wouldn't be participating in his version of events. Instead, I opened my laptop and began researching something far more interesting: the current market value of the law firm where Marcus worked. Goldman Sachs was a publicly traded company worth approximately $40 billion, making it one of the largest investment banks in the world. Marcus's entire professional identity was built around his association with this financial powerhouse, his partnership track position representing the pinnacle of his ambitions. With my inheritance, I could theoretically purchase a significant stake in Goldman Sachs, enough to influence corporate policy and senior personnel decisions. The thought of Marcus discovering that his abandoned veteran wife owned a meaningful portion of his employer struck me as deliciously ironic, but I pushed the fantasy aside. Revenge wasn't the purpose of my grandfather's legacy. Still, as I fell asleep on the couch for the second night, I couldn't help but smile at the possibilities. In 64 hours, I would have resources that made Marcus's professional achievements look like undergraduate accomplishments. His careful calculations about my financial prospects were about to prove catastrophically wrong, and I was looking forward to his reaction when reality finally penetrated his manufactured narrative. But first, I had to survive 2 more days of being technically homeless while possessing theoretical wealth that could purchase small countries. The contradiction felt appropriately symbolic of the strange journey from military service to civilian life, from marriage to independence, from perceived weakness to actual power. Tomorrow, I would begin making practical decisions about how to use this inheritance responsibly. Tonight, I would dream about my grandfather's workshop, about innovation serving protection, about building something lasting that could help people long after you were gone. I woke before dawn to the sound of someone entering the house through the front door, keys jingling with the casual confidence of ownership. My military training kicked in immediately. I was alert and assessing threats before my conscious mind fully processed what was happening. Through the living room doorway, I could see Marcus moving through the foyer, not alone. Victoria's distinctive laugh echoed through the hallway, followed by the sound of heels clicking against marble. "She's probably still asleep," Marcus said in a stage whisper that was clearly intended for me to hear. "The medication they give veterans for PTSD makes them sleep heavily. We should be able to get the rest of my things without disturbing her." The casual lie about my mental health, delivered to justify their intrusion while simultaneously painting me as medicated and unstable, revealed new depths to Marcus's character assassination strategy. I remained perfectly still on the couch, listening as they moved through the house with the careless entitlement of people who considered my presence an inconvenience rather than a legitimate claim to space. "God, this place feels different already," Victoria said, her voice carrying from the kitchen. "More spacious without all that military memorabilia cluttering everything up." Military memorabilia, my bronze star, my purple heart, the photographs of my unit that had somehow become decorative clutter rather than symbols of service and sacrifice. I pressed my face into the couch cushion to muffle any sound, fighting the urge to confront them directly. Better to gather intelligence about their intentions than to engage in emotional confrontation. "We'll need to stage it properly before listing," Marcus replied, his tone professional and detached. Victoria's decorator can come in next week to neutralize the masculine military aesthetic, make it more appealing to normal buyers. They were discussing selling the house, a property Marcus had repeatedly assured me would remain available during my treatment and recovery. Another promise dissolved by practical considerations and convenient reinterpretation of previous commitments. What? About her things? Victoria asked. The clothes and personal items you said were still here? I've arranged for a charity pickup this afternoon, Marcus answered. Goodwill specializes in veteran donations, tax-deductible, and it supports a worthy cause. My possessions, uniforms that had carried me through multiple deployments, photographs of fallen comrades, letters from soldiers I had led, were being disposed of like unwanted inventory. The casual efficiency of this erasure, the reduction of my entire military career to charitable deductions, struck me as more devastating than the financial betrayal. I heard them climbing the stairs to the master bedroom, their voices becoming muffled but still audible through the house's expensive construction. My phone showed 37 missed calls and 14 text messages, all from unknown numbers that I assumed were additional reporters following up on whatever story Marcus was promoting. One message stood out from a number I recognized, Mr. Chen's office. Sarah, please call when convenient. There are additional documents that require your immediate attention before tomorrow's transfer. Some complications have arisen that we need to discuss. Complications. The word sent ice through my veins. After everything that had happened, the possibility that my grandfather's inheritance might face legal challenges or administrative delays felt like the universe's final cruel joke. I called Mr. Chen's direct line immediately, not caring if Marcus and Victoria could hear my conversation. Sarah, thank God you called. Mr. Chen's voice carried unusual urgency. We've had inquiries about your grandfather's estate from several sources. Someone has been making inquiries about the patent portfolio and asking questions about inheritance timelines. What kind of inquiries? Legal fishing expeditions, mostly. Attorneys asking about potential claims against the estate, whether there are any disputed assets, that sort of thing. It's not unusual when large inheritances are involved, but the timing suggests someone has specific knowledge about tomorrow's transfer. The timing couldn't be coincidental. Marcus had legal training and connections throughout the New York legal community. If he suspected I had access to resources beyond my military benefits, he would certainly investigate potential claims or opportunities to complicate any inheritance proceedings. Is there anything they can do to stop or delay the transfer? I asked, keeping my voice low as I heard Marcus and Victoria moving around upstairs. Not legally, no. Your grandfather's documentation is ironclad, and the trust structure was designed specifically to prevent external interference. But they could create procedural delays, file frivolous claims that require court responses, generate media attention that complicates the process. Media attention. Marcus's reporter contacts suddenly made more sense. Not just public relations, management, but potential leverage in any financial dispute that might arise. If he could position me as an unstable veteran in need of financial supervision, he might create grounds for challenging my competency to manage large assets. What do you recommend? I asked. Complete the transfer immediately, today, if possible. Once the assets are legally yours, any external challenges become much more difficult to pursue. I thought the transfer couldn't happen until my birthday tomorrow. There's an emergency provision your grandfather included for exactly this type of situation. If you're facing immediate threats to your financial security or personal safety, the transfer can be expedited with proper documentation. Upstairs, I could hear Marcus and Victoria's voices becoming more animated, though I couldn't make out specific words. The sound of dresser drawers opening and closing suggested they were conducting a thorough search of the bedroom, possibly looking for documents or valuables I might have hidden. Can we do that today? I asked Mr. Chen. If you can be at my office in 2 hours with proper identification and sworn statements about your current circumstances, yes. The bank trustees are standing by to execute the transfer once all documentation is complete. I agreed to meet him immediately and ended the call just as Marcus and Victoria's voices became clear again from the top of the stairs. "There's nothing up here," Victoria was saying. "No jewelry, no documents, nothing valuable at all." "She must have taken everything with her when she deployed," Marcus replied. "Typical military paranoia about securing personal assets." They had been searching my belongings, looking for evidence of hidden resources or valuable items they could claim or confiscate. The violation felt more personal than the financial betrayal, a deliberate invasion of what little privacy I had remaining. I gathered the documents Mr. Chen had given me yesterday and slipped out the back door while Marcus and Victoria continued their systematic search of the upstairs rooms. The irony of escaping from my own home to protect my inheritance from my own husband wasn't lost on me, but I had learned in combat that tactical retreats often preceded decisive victories. The taxi ride to Mr. Chen's office gave me time to process the morning's revelations. Marcus wasn't just abandoning our marriage. He was actively investigating my financial situation and potentially preparing legal challenges to any assets I might inherit. His reporter contacts weren't just public relations management, but evidence, gathering for possible competency challenges. "You look tired," Mr. Chen observed when I arrived at his office. "Has something happened since yesterday?" I described the morning's events. Marcus and Victoria searching the house, the inquiries about Grandpa's estate, the media contacts that felt increasingly coordinated rather than spontaneous. "Your grandfather anticipated exactly this scenario," Mr. Chen said grimly. "He was very concerned about people who might try to exploit or manipulate you because of your inheritance. That's why he included the emergency transfer provision." The emergency documentation required detailed sworn statements about threats to my financial security and personal safety. As I described Marcus's behavior, the emptied bank accounts, the house sale plans, the disposal of my personal belongings, the coordinated media campaign, the pattern of financial abuse became starkly clear. "This constitutes economic coercion," Mr. Chen explained as he reviewed my statements. "Your husband is systematically eliminating your access to resources while positioning himself as your financial guardian. It's a classic pattern of financial abuse designed to create dependence and control." The clinical terminology helped me understand Marcus's behavior in context. This wasn't just selfish abandonment. It was deliberate economic warfare designed to ensure I remained vulnerable and dependent on his charity or institutional support. 2 additional attorneys arrived to witness the emergency transfer documentation, their presence lending gravity to proceedings that felt surreal despite their legal necessity. I was signing papers that would make me one of the wealthiest individuals in America, while technically homeless and surviving on disability payments. "The transfer will be complete by 3 p.m. today," Mr. Chen announced after all documentation was signed and notarized. "At that point, you'll have full access to all accounts, with initial liquid assets of approximately $15 million available immediately." $15 million immediately available. The figure seemed abstract until I considered its practical implications. Enough to purchase homes in every major city, enough to live anywhere in the world without financial constraints, enough to make Marcus's Goldman Sachs salary look like pocket change. "There's one more thing," Mr. Chen said, his expression becoming even more serious. "Your grandfather left specific instructions about how to handle people who might try to exploit your wealth. He suggested that sometimes the best strategy is to let them reveal their true character completely before demonstrating your actual resources." He handed me another sealed envelope with my name written in Grandpa's distinctive handwriting. Inside was a letter that felt like receiving tactical advice from beyond the grave. "My dearest Sarah," the letter began, "if you are reading this emergency letter, then someone is trying to exploit what they believe is your financial vulnerability. Let them. The people who abandon you when they think you're powerless deserve to experience the full consequences of their miscalculations." The letter continued with specific advice about maintaining strategic silence about my inheritance while documenting others' behavior for future reference. But the final paragraph contained guidance that felt almost prophetic in its accuracy. Remember that character is revealed most clearly under pressure. The people who stand by you when they believe you have nothing are your true allies. The people who try to control or exploit you when they think you're vulnerable are showing you who they really are. Act accordingly. Walking out of Mr. Chen's office as one of the wealthiest people in America felt anticlimactic. No fanfare, no immediate change in appearance or circumstances, just the knowledge that I now possessed resources that fundamentally altered every calculation in my life. I took a taxi to a hotel in Midtown Manhattan, checking into a suite that cost more per night than most people earned in a month. The luxury felt strange after 18 months of military Spartan conditions and the emotional austerity of my marriage's final days. But it represented something more important than comfort. It was my first decision made from a position of complete financial independence. From my hotel window overlooking Central Park, I called Colonel Williams to update her on my changed circumstances without revealing specific financial details. "You sound different," she observed. "More confident, less defensive." "I've had some good news about my financial situation," I said carefully. "It turns out I have more resources than I initially realized." "That's fantastic." "What kind of resources?" "Family inheritance. Enough to be completely independent and make my own decisions about the future." "Well, that changes everything, doesn't it? Makes your husband's behavior look even more pathetic in context." From the hotel's concierge, I arranged for a moving company to collect my remaining possessions from Marcus's house before the charity pickup he had scheduled. I also hired a private investigator to document any additional media contacts or legal inquiries related to my personal situation. By afternoon, I was watching from my hotel window as movers loaded my belongings into trucks, while Marcus and Victoria supervised from their car parked across the street. Even from 23 floors above, their body language suggested frustration and confusion at this unexpected development. My phone rang with Marcus's number, and this time I answered with newfound calm. "Sarah, where are you? There are movers at the house claiming you hired them." "I'm retrieving my personal belongings before your charity pickup," I replied. "I hope that's not inconvenient." "How are you paying for professional movers? Those companies charge thousands of dollars." The question revealed exactly what he had been thinking, that I was broke, desperate, and dependent on his financial mercy. His confusion at evidence contradicting that assumption was almost amusing. "I have resources you're not aware of," I said simply. "What resources?" "Your disability payments barely cover basic living expenses." "That's not your concern anymore, Marcus. You made that very clear when you emptied our accounts and abandoned me." The silence stretched for several seconds before he spoke again, his voice carrying a new note of uncertainty. "We should talk. There are things we need to discuss about our situation." "Our situation ended when you walked out. There's nothing left to discuss." I ended the call and turned off my phone, watching the movers finish loading my possessions while Marcus and Victoria sat in their car, probably trying to understand how a broke veteran had suddenly acquired the resources to hire professional services and disappear into expensive hotels. Tomorrow was my 30th birthday, the official date when my inheritance would become public record for anyone skilled enough to search corporate and trust documentation. Marcus would eventually discover exactly how wrong his calculations had been. But for now, I was content to let him wonder about the growing evidence that his assumptions about my circumstances were fundamentally flawed. The emergency transfer had given me access to my grandfather's legacy 24 hours early, but more importantly, it had provided a crystal-clear demonstration of who deserved to share in my future and who had revealed themselves as fundamentally unworthy of trust. In the morning, I would begin making decisions about how to use this inheritance responsibly. Tonight, I would order room service, sleep in a comfortable bed, and savor the knowledge that my grandfather's final gift wasn't just wealth. It was the freedom to rebuild my life exactly as I chose, surrounded only by people who valued me for who I was rather than what I could provide them. My 30th birthday arrived with Manhattan bathed in golden October sunlight, streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows of my hotel suite. I woke naturally at dawn, a habit ingrained by years of military routine, and lay in bed watching the city come alive 23 floors below. Today marked not just another year of life, but the official transformation from struggling veteran to one of America's wealthiest individuals. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was celebrating this milestone alone in a hotel room while my husband entertained his new partner in what had been our home. But solitude felt appropriate for such a profound transition. I needed space to process the magnitude of what my grandfather had built and what I was now responsible for protecting and growing. Room service delivered breakfast along with every major newspaper in New York, and I spread them across the dining table while eating fresh strawberries and drinking coffee that cost more per cup than many people spent on entire meals. The financial pages contained familiar names: defense contractors, aerospace companies, technology firms, many of which I now realized had been licensing my grandfather's patents for decades. Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, Boeing, General Dynamics, corporations, whose stock prices reflected billions in revenue generated partially through innovations my grandfather had developed in his Cambridge garage 70 years ago. The morning's market reports showed these companies continuing to grow, meaning the royalty payments flowing into my accounts would increase correspondingly. My phone, which I had turned back on to coordinate with Mr. Chen's office, showed 43 missed calls and 27 text messages. Most were from unknown numbers, reporters, I assumed, following up on whatever narrative Marcus was promoting. But several were from numbers I recognized, including Marcus himself, his mother Judith, and even Victoria Ashworth. Marcus's texts showed increasing urgency and confusion. "We need to talk immediately. There are legal matters that require discussion." Then, 2 hours later, "Sarah, I know you're angry, but avoiding me isn't solving anything. Call me." Finally, sent at 3 a.m. "Whatever resources you think you have access to, you're making a mistake. Don't do anything rash without legal advice." The assumption that I was acting rashly, that my newfound independence represented poor judgment rather than financial reality, revealed how completely Marcus had misunderstood both my character and my circumstances. His legal training had apparently taught him to assume that unexpected behavior indicated emotional instability rather than changed circumstances. Victoria's message was more direct. "Sarah, I think there's been some misunderstanding about your situation. Marcus has been trying to reach you about important financial matters. Perhaps we could meet for coffee and discuss things calmly." The presumption that she had any role in my personal affairs, that our relationship was collegial enough for coffee meetings, demonstrated a remarkable lack of self-awareness. This was the woman who had systematically replaced me in my husband's affections while I served overseas, who had participated in searching through my belongings, who had discussed disposing of my military honors as if they were unwanted furniture. Deleted all the messages without responding, and prepared for my meeting with Mr. Chen to complete the final inheritance documentation. Today's appointment would make yesterday's emergency transfer official and provide me with comprehensive briefings on the full scope of my grandfather's empire. The taxi ride through Manhattan felt different, knowing I could purchase most of the buildings we passed without significantly impacting my net worth. The luxury boutiques where Victoria shopped, the exclusive restaurants where Marcus entertained clients, the prestigious law firms where his colleagues competed for partnerships. All of them represented financial goals that were now meaningless. To me, Mr. Chen's office had been transformed overnight into what resembled a corporate boardroom, with additional attorneys, accountants, and financial advisors assembled to brief me on various aspects of my inheritance. The gravity of their collective presence underscored the complexity of what I was inheriting, not just money, but an ongoing business empire that required active management and strategic decision-making. "Happy birthday, Sarah," Mr. Chen said, as I entered the conference room. "Today marks not just your 30th birthday, but your assumption of one of America's most significant private defense technology portfolios. The briefing materials spread across the conference table resembled what I had seen during military intelligence meetings: comprehensive analyses of market conditions, competitive landscapes, and strategic opportunities. But instead of enemy, positions, and tactical advantages, these documents outlined my grandfather's business empire and its potential for expansion. The current portfolio includes 237 active patents across multiple defense applications, explained Catherine Morrison, the intellectual property attorney who had managed Grandpa's patents for 30 years. These range from foundational radar technologies that every modern aircraft requires to cutting-edge communication systems that enable secure military networks. The patents weren't just historical artifacts generating residual income, they were living technologies that continued evolving through licensing agreements that required ongoing innovation and development. My grandfather had structured these agreements to ensure that his intellectual property remained current and valuable rather than becoming obsolete. Your grandfather was particularly prescient about emerging technologies, added David Chen, the financial advisor who managed the trust's investment portfolio. He anticipated the importance of satellite communications, GPS navigation, and cybersecurity decades before these became mainstream military requirements. The investment returns from reinvesting patent royalties had been extraordinary. What started as modest licensing fees in the 1950s had grown into a diversified portfolio spanning defense technology, aerospace engineering, and communications infrastructure. The compound growth over 70 years had created wealth that exceeded many countries' gross domestic products. The monthly royalty income currently averages $4.2 million, David continued. But that figure is increasing annually as military technology becomes more sophisticated and dependent on your grandfather's foundational innovations. $4.2 million per month. More than $50 million annually in passive income that required no effort on my part, beyond maintaining the existing licensing agreements. The figure dwarfed what most people earned in their entire careers, making it almost abstract in its magnitude. However, Catherine warned, these patents require active management to maintain their value. Military technology evolves rapidly, and our licensing agreements include provisions for ongoing development and improvement. You'll need to make strategic decisions about research investments, partnership opportunities, and technology development. The responsibility felt simultaneously overwhelming and energizing. This wasn't just inherited wealth to be preserved. It was an active business empire that required intelligence, judgment, and strategic thinking to maintain and grow. Your grandfather left detailed recommendations about potential partnerships and expansion opportunities, Mr. Chen said, handing me a leather portfolio thick with documentation. He spent the final years of his life analyzing emerging defense technologies and identifying areas where his patents could be applied to new military challenges. The portfolio contained analyses of cybersecurity threats, space-based defense systems, and autonomous weapons technologies, cutting-edge military applications that would require the kind of foundational innovations my grandfather had pioneered. His vision extended decades into the future, anticipating military needs that were only now becoming apparent to defense planners. There are also humanitarian applications, added Dr. Sarah Williams, a technology consultant who had worked with Grandpa on civilian adaptations of military patents. Many of these innovations have potential uses in disaster relief, emergency communications, and medical technology. Your grandfather was very interested in ensuring his work served broader social purposes. The possibility of using inherited wealth for humanitarian purposes felt like a fitting tribute to Grandpa's legacy. Military technology that protected soldiers could also protect civilians during natural disasters, enable emergency responders to coordinate more effectively, and provide communication capabilities in crisis situations. What kind of decisions do I need to make immediately? I asked, feeling somewhat overwhelmed by the scope of responsibilities I was inheriting. Nothing urgent, Mr. Chen assured me. Your grandfather designed the trust structure to be self-sustaining for several years while you learned the business. But there are opportunities that would benefit from your attention within the next few months. The opportunities included potential partnerships with emerging technology companies, licensing agreements with international defense contractors, and research investments in next-generation military applications. Each represented the possibility to significantly expand the patent portfolio's value while advancing military capabilities that could save lives. There's one more aspect we need to discuss, Mr. Chen said, his tone becoming more serious. Your grandfather was very concerned about maintaining operational security around this inheritance. The amounts involved and the defense applications make you a potential target for various threats. Operational security. The military terminology felt familiar and appropriate. With great wealth came great vulnerability to kidnapping, extortion, corporate espionage, and political manipulation. My grandfather had faced these threats for decades while maintaining the modest public profile that protected his family and business interests. We recommend establishing multiple layers of protection, explained James Rodriguez, the security consultant who had protected my grandfather's interests for 20 years. Corporate structures that obscure your personal ownership, residential, security measures that protect your privacy, and communication protocols that prevent unauthorized access to sensitive information. The security briefing resembled what I had received before deploying to combat zones: detailed analysis of potential threats, systematic approaches to risk mitigation, and protocols for maintaining operational effectiveness while minimizing vulnerability. Your grandfather lived for decades as one of America's wealthiest individuals without anyone knowing, James continued. He maintained complete privacy about his resources while using them effectively to advance his interests and values. We recommend following his model. The privacy protections included corporate shells that hid my ownership of assets, legal structures that prevented public disclosure of my net worth, and communication systems that couldn't be monitored by hostile intelligence services. My grandfather had essentially operated as a private defense contractor with intelligence-level security protocols. After 6 hours of briefings, I emerged from Mr. Chen's office as the official owner of assets worth 253 Ford 17-826, a figure that had grown by nearly $2 million during the day's meetings due to normal investment returns and royalty payments. The weight of this responsibility felt different from military command. Instead of leading soldiers through immediate dangers, I was now steward of technologies that would protect future generations of American service members. Instead of tactical decisions with short-term consequences, I was making strategic choices that would impact national security for decades. Walking through Manhattan with this knowledge felt surreal. The people around me, rushing to important meetings, worried about mortgage payments, celebrating modest promotions, had no idea they were sharing the sidewalk with someone who could purchase the buildings they worked in without meaningful financial impact. But more importantly, I understood that my grandfather's final gift wasn't just money. It was the opportunity to continue his legacy of innovation in service of protection. The patents weren't just intellectual property generating income. They were contributions to American military superiority that had saved countless lives and would continue doing so for generations. My phone buzzed with another call from Marcus, the 12th since morning. This time I answered, curious about his persistence. "Sarah, thank God. We need to meet immediately. There are some very concerning rumors circulating about your financial situation." Rumors. Apparently, someone with legal connections had begun researching my changed circumstances and discovered information that contradicted Marcus's assumptions about my poverty and dependence. "What kind of rumors?" I asked, genuinely curious about how much he had learned. "People are saying you've come into significant money, inheritance or something. But that's impossible because I know your family's financial situation. Your grandfather was a retired military officer living on pension. The Conviction in his voice revealed how completely he had misunderstood my grandfather's legacy. Like most people, Marcus had seen only the public persona, the modest retiree in his small house with his old truck, without recognizing the extraordinary achievements hidden beneath that carefully maintained facade. Maybe your sources are better informed than you realized, I suggested. Sarah, if you've somehow accessed funds through questionable means, you could be in serious legal trouble. There are regulations about veterans and financial assistance programs. I'm trying to protect you. The assumption that my newfound resources must be illegitimate, that a veteran couldn't possibly have legitimate access to significant wealth, revealed the depth of his prejudices about military service and its potential rewards. I appreciate your concern, I said, but my financial situation is completely legitimate and properly documented. Then we need to discuss how this affects our divorce proceedings. If you've been hiding assets during our marriage, that constitutes fraud. There it was, the real reason for his urgent concern. Not worry about my welfare, but calculation about how my changed circumstances might affect his financial position in divorce proceedings. I haven't hidden anything, Marcus. I simply inherited resources you weren't aware of. What resources? From whom? Your grandfather left you that old house and maybe some savings bonds. Nothing that could fund the kind of expenses you're suddenly incurring. His casual dismissal of my grandfather's legacy, his assumption that a military career couldn't generate significant wealth, demonstrated how completely he had underestimated the man who had shaped my values and apparently my financial future. Goodbye, Marcus, I said, ending the call before he could continue his interrogation. Tonight, I would celebrate my 30th birthday alone in a hotel suite, surrounded by documents detailing responsibilities that would occupy the rest of my life. Tomorrow, I would begin making decisions about how to honor my grandfather's legacy while building my own future, free from people who had revealed themselves unworthy of sharing either my struggles or my success. But first, I had calls to make to the real estate agents who specialized in Manhattan penthouses. If I was going to rebuild my life from a position of strength, I needed a home worthy of both my new resources and my grandfather's memory. Within 48 hours of my official inheritance, I had purchased a penthouse apartment on Fifth Avenue, overlooking Central Park, hired a private staff, and established offices for managing my grandfather's business empire. The speed of these transformations felt dizzying even to me, but I was determined to demonstrate that my newfound resources came with corresponding competence and judgment. The penthouse had belonged to a technology executive who needed to liquidate assets quickly due to SEC investigations, making it available for immediate purchase at $38 million. The apartment occupied the entire 52nd floor, with panoramic views of Manhattan and Central Park that reminded me of the tactical overwatch positions I had occupied in Afghanistan, elevated perspectives that provided comprehensive situational awareness. My first major decision was hiring Elena Rodriguez as my chief of staff, a former Navy intelligence officer who had spent 15 years managing classified projects for defense contractors. Elena understood both military culture and corporate complexity, making her ideal for coordinating between my various advisors while maintaining the operational security my grandfather had established. Your grandfather's files indicate he was tracking several emerging threats to his patent portfolio, Elena reported during our first briefing in my new home office. Chinese technology companies have been attempting to reverse engineer his innovations, and several defense contractors have been lobbying for government seizure of his patents under national security provisions. The threats were more sophisticated than I had anticipated. Military technology attracted interest from foreign intelligence services, competitors seeking to circumvent licensing fees, and government agencies that preferred direct control over critical innovations. My grandfather had navigated these challenges for decades while maintaining his independence and protecting his intellectual property. What are our defensive options? I asked, falling naturally into the strategic planning mindset that had served me in combat operations. Legal, financial, and political, Elena replied. Your grandfather established relationships with key senators and defense officials who understand the value of maintaining private innovation incentives. We need to strengthen those relationships while documenting any attempts at corporate espionage or government overreach. The political dimension felt familiar from my military experience, where mission success often depended on managing relationships with local officials, allied forces, and civilian authorities. Building coalitions and maintaining strategic partnerships were skills that translated directly from military operations to business management. My second major decision was establishing the Hayes Foundation, a charitable organization focused on supporting veteran transition programs and advancing military technology research. The foundation would serve dual purposes, providing meaningful outlets for my resources while maintaining cover for my more sensitive business activities. Charitable work provides excellent camouflage for wealthy individuals, explained Patricia. Kim, the nonprofit consultant who had helped establish foundations for other defense contractors. People assume that someone focused on philanthropy is spending their money rather than accumulating it, which helps maintain privacy about your actual net worth. The foundation's initial budget was $50 million, a figure that represented less than 6 months of royalty income, but enough to fund substantial programs supporting veterans and military research. The Hayes Foundation would sponsor scholarships for military children, fund research into post-traumatic stress treatment, and develop technologies that could improve soldier safety and communication. During this period of rapid expansion and organization, Marcus's attempts to contact me became increasingly desperate and revealing. His text messages showed a progression from confusion to anger to what appeared to be genuine panic as he realized the magnitude of his miscalculation. "Sarah, people are asking questions about you that I can't answer," read one message. "Someone from the Defense Department called my office asking about our relationship status. This is affecting my security clearance review." The Defense Department inquiry made perfect sense once I understood my new position in the military-industrial complex. My grandfather's patents were classified at the highest levels of government secrecy, and my assumption of control over these technologies would naturally trigger security reviews of anyone in my immediate family or social circle. Marcus's security clearance was required for his work with Goldman Sachs's government clients, particularly their defense contractor accounts. Any suggestion that he had compromised relationships with individuals controlling sensitive defense technologies could end his career in corporate finance. "We need to meet immediately to discuss how your situation affects my professional standing," another message read. "My partners are asking questions I can't answer without understanding what you've become involved in." What I had become involved in. As if inheriting my grandfather's legitimate business empire constituted suspicious activity rather than natural succession. Marcus's inability to conceive that a female veteran might possess extraordinary resources through legitimate means revealed the limitations of his imagination and the prejudices underlying his assumptions. I decided to respond to his messages, partly from curiosity about his evolving understanding of my circumstances, and partly because Elena had advised that maintaining some communication might provide useful intelligence about external threats to my privacy. "Marcus," I replied simply, "my inheritance is legitimate and properly documented. If your security clearance is being reviewed, that suggests your background investigators are being thorough about potential foreign influences. Not that there's anything questionable about my situation." His response came within minutes. "Inheritance from whom? Your grandfather was a retired Army officer living in a modest house. There's no way he left you the kind of money that explains your current spending patterns." The persistent assumption that military service couldn't generate significant wealth demonstrated how completely civilian society misunderstood the potential rewards of military innovation. Marcus, like most people, saw only the public facade of military careers, modest salaries, government benefits, simple retirements, without recognizing the extraordinary opportunities available to those who contributed genuine innovations to national defense. My grandfather was more accomplished than you realized, I replied. He held over 200 patents in defense technology and had been licensing his innovations to contractors for 70 years. The silence that followed this revelation lasted for 6 hours before Marcus called directly, his voice carrying a tone I had never heard before, genuine fear mixed with desperate calculation. 200 patents? He asked without preamble. Sarah, if that's true, then we need to discuss how this affects our divorce settlement. Community property laws mean I'm entitled to half of any assets acquired during our marriage. The immediate pivot from confusion to financial calculation was so predictable that I almost laughed. Marcus hadn't called to apologize for his behavior, to acknowledge his mistakes, or to express any interest in reconciliation. He had called to stake a claim to resources he had previously dismissed as worthless. The inheritance was established before our marriage, I explained, held in trust structures that explicitly excluded it from marital assets. You have no claim to any of it. That can't be legal, Marcus insisted. You can't hide major assets during a marriage and then claim their separate property. I didn't hide anything. I simply inherited resources you weren't aware of. There's a significant difference. We need to have our attorneys review this immediately. If you're trying to defraud me of my rightful share of marital assets, I ended the call before he could finish his threat. The conversation had provided exactly the intelligence Elena had predicted. Marcus's primary concern wasn't my welfare or our relationship, but his potential financial claims against my inheritance. Later that evening, Victoria Ashworth called my new number, which surprised me since I hadn't given it to anyone connected to my previous life. Her ability to reach me suggested either sophisticated investigation or connections within the legal community that had been researching my changed circumstances. Sarah, this is Victoria. I think we got off on the wrong foot, and I'd like to try to fix that. The presumption that our relationship could be fixed rather than fundamentally hostile struck me as remarkable. This was the woman who had systematically replaced me in my husband's affections, who had participated in disposing of my personal belongings, who had discussed my military service as if it were shameful rather than honorable. I'm not sure what you mean, I replied, curious about her strategy. Marcus has been under tremendous stress since you returned from deployment. He made some poor decisions when he was emotional and scared. But now that we understand your actual circumstances, perhaps we can find a more amicable resolution. The careful phrasing revealed that she understood my financial situation had changed dramatically, though not necessarily the specific details. Her suggestion of an amicable resolution implied that she and Marcus had discussed strategies for managing their relationship with me given my newfound resources. What kind of resolution did you have in mind? I asked. Well, clearly you're in a much stronger position than any of us realized. Marcus feels terrible about how he handled things, and he's hoping you might be willing to discuss a reconciliation. Reconciliation. After emptying our bank accounts, abandoning me during my medical recovery, planning to sell our house, and disposing of my military honors, Marcus was now interested in reconciliation because he had discovered I possessed extraordinary wealth. That's an interesting proposition, I said, maintaining carefully neutral tone. What changed his mind about our incompatibility? He realizes he was wrong about your prospects and capabilities. He's hoping you might give him a chance to prove he can be the partner you deserve, the partner I deserved. After calculating that, I was worthless when he thought I was broke. Marcus had recalculated my value upon discovering my wealth and concluded that I was now worth his attention and commitment. I'll consider his request, I said diplomatically. Thank you for reaching out. After ending the call, I discussed the conversation with Elena, who had been monitoring communications for potential security threats or intelligence gathering efforts. They're fishing for information about your resources while positioning themselves for potential reconciliation, Elena assessed. Classic reconnaissance disguised as personal outreach. What do you recommend? Document everything, respond minimally, and let them reveal their full strategy before making any commitments. People show their true character when they think they can benefit from association with wealth. Elena's advice aligned with my grandfather's letter about letting people reveal their true nature before demonstrating my actual capabilities. Marcus and Victoria were providing perfect examples of how individuals recalculated relationships when financial circumstances changed. My fourth day as an officially wealthy person brought a surprise visitor to my new penthouse, Judith Parker, Marcus's mother, arriving unannounced with what she described as urgent family matters requiring immediate discussion. "Sarah, darling," she began with her characteristic Southern charm, "I had no idea about your family's extraordinary legacy. Marcus mentioned that your grandfather was far more accomplished than any of us realized." The careful phrasing suggested that Marcus had briefed his family about my changed circumstances while managing their expectations about potential reconciliation opportunities. My grandfather was an exceptional man, I agreed, curious about her agenda. Indeed he was. And clearly, he raised an exceptional granddaughter. Marcus has been beside himself with regret about his behavior during your homecoming. He was so overwhelmed by fear about your medical situation that he made terrible decisions. Medical situation. As if my cancer diagnosis and subsequent recovery were abstract challenges rather than life-threatening realities that required genuine support from family members. Marcus acted according to his character, I replied. Crisis situations reveal who people really are. But surely you can understand how frightening it must have been for him, thinking he might lose you to cancer while also facing enormous medical bills. He was trying to protect both of you from financial catastrophe. The revisionist narrative was masterfully constructed. Marcus as the worried husband making difficult but practical decisions to protect our family's financial future, rather than the selfish man who had abandoned his sick wife to pursue a more socially advantageous relationship. His fears about medical bills turned out to be unnecessary, I observed. Yes, thank goodness for your grandfather's foresight. But Marcus couldn't have known about your inheritance when he was making those difficult decisions. He could have asked me about my family's resources before assuming I would be financially dependent on his charity. Judith paused, apparently not having anticipated that response to her carefully prepared defense of her son's behavior. Well, yes, perhaps better communication might have prevented some misunderstandings. But the important thing now is moving forward constructively. What did you have in mind? Marcus is hoping you might be willing to attend a family dinner this weekend. Nothing formal, just an opportunity to discuss your situation in a more relaxed environment. Family dinner, as if we were still family, as if Marcus's abandonment and Victoria's intrusion were minor misunderstandings that could be resolved over casual conversation and shared meals. I'll consider it, I said, using the same diplomatic response I had given Victoria. After Judith left, I realized that my newfound wealth had transformed me from discarded veteran to valuable family asset in less than a week. The same people who had calculated my worth at zero when they thought I was broke were now recalculating my value and repositioning themselves for potential benefit from association with my resources. The contrast between their current solicitude and their previous dismissal provided perfect validation of my grandfather's warnings about people who would exploit wealth while abandoning genuine need. Marcus, Victoria, and Judith were demonstrating exactly the kind of conditional loyalty that my grandfather had spent decades avoiding. Tomorrow, I would begin implementing longer-term strategies for managing my inheritance while protecting myself from exactly the kind of manipulation these three were attempting. But tonight, I would review my grandfather's files on maintaining privacy and independence while surrounded by people whose primary interest was calculating their potential benefit from proximity to extraordinary wealth. The transition from abandoned veteran to pursued heiress had taken less than a week, but the lessons about human nature it provided would last a lifetime. 3 weeks after my inheritance became official, Marcus requested a face-to-face meeting with the formal gravity of someone negotiating an international treaty. His text message, specified a neutral location, the Oak Room at the Plaza Hotel, and suggested we needed to discuss our mutual interests and future arrangements. The careful phrasing revealed extensive consultation with attorneys who had undoubtedly researched every aspect of my financial situation. I arrived 15 minutes early and selected a corner table that provided clear sightlines to all entrances, a habit from military operations that had proven equally useful in civilian contexts. The Oak Room's old-world elegance, leather banquettes, crystal chandeliers, oil paintings of American industrialists, seemed appropriate for a conversation that would determine whether my former husband had learned anything meaningful from his catastrophic miscalculations. Marcus appeared precisely on time, wearing his most expensive suit and carrying himself with the careful confidence of someone who had spent weeks preparing for this encounter. But I noticed subtle signs of strain, new lines around his eyes, a tightness in his jaw, the hyper-awareness of someone whose professional standing had been unexpectedly threatened. "Sarah?" he said, taking the seat across from me with deliberate composure. "You look remarkable. Civilian life clearly agrees with you." The compliment felt calculated rather than genuine, part of a strategy designed to re-establish rapport before moving to more substantive negotiations. I had seen similar techniques during diplomatic briefings with Afghan provincial officials, establishing personal connection before discussing contested territories or resource allocation. "Thank you. How are things at Goldman Sachs?" A flash of something, anger, frustration, fear, crossed his expression before he regained control. "Challenging, actually. My security clearance review has raised some unexpected complications." "What kind of complications?" "Questions about my association with individuals who control classified defense technologies. Apparently, being married to someone with access to sensitive patents requires additional scrutiny." The government security review made perfect sense given my grandfather's classified innovations and their continued importance to national defense. Marcus's clearance allowed him to work with defense contractors and government clients, making any connection to my patent portfolio a legitimate security concern. "I imagine that's professionally inconvenient," I observed. "More than inconvenient. The review process could take months, during which I'm restricted from certain client accounts. My partnership prospects are essentially frozen until this resolves." The admission revealed the real motivation behind his sudden interest in reconciliation. This wasn't about personal regret or emotional reconnection. It was about professional damage control and financial self-preservation. "What do you think would resolve your clearance issues?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "Complete transparency about our relationship status and your financial interests. The investigators need to understand whether we have ongoing ties that could create conflicts of interest." Translation: Marcus needed either complete reconciliation that would position him as my trusted partner, or complete divorce that would sever any connection to my resources. The ambiguous separation currently threatened his career without providing any benefits. "And what would you prefer?" Marcus leaned forward slightly, his expression becoming more intense. "Sarah, I know I made terrible mistakes when you came home from deployment. I was scared, overwhelmed by the medical costs and uncertain prognosis. I acted out of fear rather than faith in our relationship." The apology was carefully constructed, but felt rehearsed rather than heartfelt. He had identified fear as an acceptable explanation for his behavior, more sympathetic than greed or ambition, less damaging to his self-image than simple selfishness. "You were practical," I replied, using his own justification against him. "You assessed the situation and made decisions based on your best interests. I was wrong about your prospects and capabilities. Your grandfather's legacy changes everything. About our potential future together." There it was, the explicit acknowledgement that his interest in reconciliation was entirely dependent on my financial resources. When he thought I was broke, I wasn't worth staying with. Now that he knew I was wealthy, I was worth pursuing again. So your feelings about our marriage have changed based on my inheritance? My understanding of our possibilities has changed. With your resources, we could build something extraordinary together. The phrase, your resources, revealed everything I needed to know about his motivations. Not our shared future, not mutual love and support, but my resources and what they could provide for his ambitions. Marcus, I said, setting down my coffee with deliberate calm, you've just confirmed everything I needed to know about your character. His confident expression flickered with uncertainty. What do you mean? You calculated my worth at 0 when you thought I was broke. Now you're recalculating my value based on my inheritance. That's not love. That's a business transaction. Sarah, you're being unfair. People change, circumstances change. Character doesn't change, I interrupted, standing from the table. My grandfather taught me that crisis reveals who people truly are. You revealed yourself completely when you emptied our accounts and walked away. Marcus's composure finally cracked. You can't just dismiss 4 years of marriage over one mistake. We built something together. We built nothing together. You built a career while I served overseas. When serving that career required abandoning your sick wife, you made your choice. I pulled out my phone and transferred $50,000 to a veteran housing charity in Marcus's name. Consider that my contribution to your character education. Some lessons are expensive. His face went pale as he realized the casual ease with which I had just donated more than his annual salary. Sarah, please. Goodbye, Marcus. Enjoy explaining to Victoria how you lost a $250 million inheritance because you couldn't handle basic human decency. I walked away from the Plaza Hotel knowing I would never see him again. My grandfather had been right. True wealth wasn't money, but the freedom to choose relationships based on genuine respect rather than financial calculation. 6 months later, the Hayes Foundation had funded housing for 300 homeless veterans. Marcus's security clearance was permanently revoked, ending his career in corporate finance. And I learned that the best revenge against people who abandon you for being worthless is living well without them. What did you think of Sarah's ultimate revenge? Have you ever discovered someone's true character during a crisis? Share your thoughts below, and don't forget to subscribe for more incredible stories of justice and redemption. Hit that notification bell so you never miss our latest uploads.